Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are happy to see such a big number of participants here joining us today on the webinar of the Topical Requirements. I'm Kathleen Seals, Vice President, Standards and Guidance, and I have here with me George Borum, who is our Director, Standards and Guidance, specialized in IT audit. Now, our agenda for today is quite packed with lots of information on the Topical Requirements, and we are looking forward to sharing that with you. But before we start dive into the content of the webinar, we would like to share some practical arrangements with you. And for that, I'll hand it over to you, George.
Okay, thank you, Kat. Hello, everyone. It's great to be with you today. Before we get started, we have 3 administrative items for you. So first, CPE, Continuing Professional Education, will be offered for this webinar. In order to qualify for that, you will need to be connected to the webinar for at least 50 minutes, and then we will have some alertness checks during the webinar. So there will be 4 alertness checks. You need to participate in 3 of those 4. So if you miss one, no big deal, just hit the other 3. And then we will email you a CPE completion certificate within 60 days of the webinar. The second thing, if you have any technical issues during the webinar, please submit any questions that you have related to that or that you need some help. You'll just submit that in the questions console. We'll have someone behind the scenes contact you and try to address any issues that you're having. To be proactive, though, I've been told that if you're on a PC, if you hit F5, that will refresh, and that could be part of your issue. If you're on a Mac, it is Command R to refresh. So you may want to try those before you message us, but at any rate, we'll help you out. And then the third item that I have, any questions that you have during the webinar today, or if you have any questions already, please feel free to submit those as well in the same area where you submit any technical issues. And then at the end of the presentation, we're going to save a few minutes to go through some questions. So with that, I will pass it back to Kat.
Thank you, George. So let's take a look at what we will cover on today's agenda. We'll start by providing you a short overview of the IPPF Evolution project. This will include a discussion on how the concept of the topical requirements have been developed throughout the project. Then next, we will move on to our due diligence process. We will explain a bit which parties are involved in the development of the topical requirements and how we gather all that input collected from a broad range of stakeholders. The topical requirement concept then, here we'll define what topical requirements are, what they are not, and why they are needed. So in this part of the presentation, we aim to clarify any misconceptions and also highlight the importance of the topical requirements in the broader context of the project. The topical requirement structure, that is where we will explore the different parts within the topical requirements. We'll define and identify which parts are mandatory and which are supplemental guidance, drawing there some parallels with what we have currently in the new standards. And then our first pilot. Our first pilot focuses on cybersecurity, and we'll take a deep dive into the technical aspects there. We'll dive into what you need to focus on when performing a cybersecurity audit and explore a bit the additional guidance and tools as well that are available in that particular topical requirement. We are currently in the public exposure period, which closes on July 3rd, and I will provide you there with some information on where you can find the survey. And of course, we strongly encourage you to participate because your feedback is really valuable for us to finalize that draft. And then to close, as George was mentioning already, we have some time for questions there. We have here some colleagues in the background working with us, collecting your questions via the Q&A, and they will send us the most popular ones, which we will then address at the end of the session. Now let's start with looking at the IPPF Evolution project. I'm sure that you are all familiar here with the figure, the graphic on the left side of the slide, showing you the existing IPPF framework, which has been effective now since 2017. Now, we still have the IPPF framework. We have a new framework consisting of new elements, but the IPPF framework does still continue to exist. It exists now of 3 core parts, and the new global internal audit standards just released in January this year are the core part of that new framework. They integrate all the mandatory elements and implementation guidance from the previous IPPF framework. And then we have that outer circle, which is the global guidance that all is being currently updated for the moment to reflect the new standards. This includes our GTECs, our global technology audit guides, and our practice guides. And then we have there that new part in the middle, the topical requirements. These requirements are linked to the standards and contain actually mandatory elements on the same level as the standards, along with supplemental guidance. Then let us take a look at how the concept has started and has been, I would say, developed over the past 2-3 years. One of the main goals of the IPPF evolution project was to really ensure that the framework maintains top quality and consistency all across internal audit practices. So we want to make sure that our internal auditors have a solid, high quality standards to rely on, to follow, no matter where they are in the world and no matter what industry they are in. We also aim there to boost our relevance as a standard setting body by addressing then all these common and what we call pervasive risk areas. We want to make sure that our standards stay aligned with the evolving needs of the profession. So we want to support our internal auditors by tackling these most pressing challenges they face today, but also tomorrow. Now, at the Global Assembly in 2022, the IPPF Evolution Project was presented there and did receive quite general feedback. At that stage, we still talked about the application standards, but we didn't include already that conversation with these people during the Global Assembly. Now, as just a small background, the Global Assembly is that key event, that important annual meeting with all the representatives of the institutes from all over the world, where we discuss the IIA's global strategy, as well as important issues and priorities affecting the profession and all the institutes worldwide. So important there to mention is that we gather there already that global perspective from the members worldwide. The next step was then to create a dedicated task force to further define the concept of the topical requirements and to develop the due process. This task force included the chair of the global board, as well as some other global board members, as well as the chair and some members from the standards board, and also some IIA staff to support the project. After then all the discussions and the general agreement during the different stages of the project, the global board and the IIA executive team decided to proceed with the concept, and they have directed us then at that time to start working on the first draft of the topical requirements. Now, where are the topical requirements positioned in our IIA portfolio? At the IIA, we create different types of content to support our internal auditors. When a topic and a risk starts to emerge, we want to share information very quickly, and therefore we publish information such as research, white papers, and thought leadership articles, podcasts, all these type of information to keep everyone updated in the short term on the latest developments. Then as a topic becomes more, I would say, mature and established, they can get included in our global guidance or the topical requirements even, and our certification. And then we have at the right there our global internal audit standards. They cover more what we call the core aspects of the audit profession. They are more timeless, they are widely applicable, and they provide for that strong basis, that strong foundation for practicing internal audit. And we offer lots of educational training on different maturity levels of our topics there, as well as certifications to demonstrate your competencies. Now, where are the topical requirements? As you see there, they are positioned to address the more mature risk areas. We believe that to develop effective standards in these areas, you need a stable regulatory environment, as well as recognize good practices as a foundation. Why is that important? Well, mature risk areas have already been studied extensively, and there are already established best practices that you can rely on. So that is very important to provide for stable and also for robust, reliable standards. We also have a thorough process to select and prioritize the topics for which we want to develop topical requirements. And as you may remember, during our standards exposure period last year, we included 2 questions on the topical requirements. We did not just only poll for the support on the concept of the topical requirements, we also asked for some input on potential topics, and we received actually over more than 500 suggestions there. Later on this year, we had then also conducted a dedicated survey on the topical requirements, where we gathered some more additional ideas. So to get a very broad, comprehensive overview, we started structuring that and provided that to the Global Guidance Council. We also relied a lot on external information, like information of reports from our partner consulting firms, from the World Economic Forum, and we have, of course, as well, very interesting internal resources, like our Risk and Focus report, the Vision 2035 project, the information that we collected during our General Assembly. So all this very valuable input for prioritizing and selecting topics. Now, just to come back on our question on the topical requirements during the standards exposure period. During that period, we started communicating on the concept and starting to socialize the concept. And during that survey, we explained the concept of the topical requirements, including as well that mandatory aspect. Now, looking at the results, we found that most people supported adding the topical requirements as that mandatory part of the IPPF. Now, the level of support did vary from region to region, as you see, but overall, 62% of everyone surveyed thought that this was useful as a part of the IPPF framework. As for then these regional differences, we believe that areas where the profession is newer, that they are more eager for these requirements, because in a new function who is probably less mature, there's probably a bigger need for clear guidance and standards on how to perform and execute the audits effectively. We've noticed as well that the level of disagreement is higher in North America and Europe. According to the feedback that we received there, the disagreements were mainly supported by the argument that risk in such areas as cyber and fraud are already subject to strict regulations in these areas. So as a result, there is at least probably the perception that this is less necessary to address these issues in mandatory standards. However, we want to emphasize that the risks in these areas are often very specific and complex, and even with strict regulations, it's very crucial for internal auditors to tackle these issues in a correct way, in a methodical way, and in a consistent way. And also at that stage, people had not seen yet the topical requirements, so they didn't really know what was coming, what to expect. So we hope now that with the first cybersecurity pilot out there, that it becomes more clear that these are requirements all focusing on the essential tasks, rather than being too prescriptive or overly ambitious or exaggerated. Now, going back to our prioritizing and selection process, give you already some sneak peek here on what is coming. Right now, we have our cybersecurity pilot out there for exposure. We are then going to rework the draft based on all the comments that are coming in. We plan to publish then the final draft of this cybersecurity one by the end of this year. And meanwhile, we are already developing the next topical requirement, which will be on third-party risk. And the other topics that you see here listed on the slide will follow later on next year. Because for some of these topics, we probably need to more, let's say, fine-tune a bit in terms of the scope, because some of them are very broad. For example, fraud risk management and ESG, very broad topics, so we might want to consider splitting them up in some subtopics, actually. So then the due process. Let me shortly walk you through on how the IIA handles the governance of developing our standards as well as our guidance. To ensure good governance, the IIA Global Board has set up some key bodies like the Independent IPPF Oversight Council and the International Internal Audit Standards Board, and some committees like the Global Guidance Council. The Standards Board, as you know, has been working over the past 3 years very hard to develop the new Global Internal Audit Standards released in the beginning of this year. So their mission is to develop, maintain, and promote the standards. Then we have our Global Guidance Council, which has a similar role, but more for the authoritative guidance. And both Standards Board and GGC are made up of these very competent people, certified people representing all regions of the world. So we have very solid nomination criteria for nominating and selecting these people. Also important is that international perspective. They come from all over the world to have that global perspective there. And then we have the Oversight Council. They oversee the IASB and the GGC. They oversee the due processes to make sure that they follow the due process. They play a more advisory role there. And then in the dark blue box, that's us here in the IA headquarters. We coordinate and collaborate with the committees, with the councils and the boards, as well as what you see there on the right, that wide range of stakeholders to collect all that input for developing standards and guidance. So it's actually a very collaborative process. Now, as I mentioned already, the GGC plays an important role in developing the authoritative guidance, but recently the GGC has taken on that role as well now to develop the topical requirements. And the reason for the GGC taking up that role is that the governance structure that they have currently in place is actually more suitable for developing these requirements. Because for developing topical requirements, we are aware of the fact that, and the Standards Board recognizes that as well, that we need very specialized expertise for that. And while both IASB and GGC members, of course, have very high qualities and competencies, the development of topical requirements demands not only pulling in audit expertise, but very specific expertise in these areas, these risk domains. And unlike the IASB, the GGC has already that governance structure in place where we can include what we call knowledge groups. And this allows us then to bring in that necessary expertise in these specific domains without having to create additional structures for the IASB. However, as you will see in a few minutes, both the GGC and the IASB are involved in developing the topical requirements. So in the interest of time, I would suggest that I skip these 3 slides. You will receive the slide deck as well. So this was just to illustrate a bit the international perspective, as well as showing you the consistent collaboration between the bodies, as well as the different organizations that are represented there at the IPPF Oversight Council. But now looking a bit more into how, in concrete, the topical requirements are being developed. First, we have, as I was already mentioning, we create that kind of inventory to have an overview on all potential topical requirements, topics for the topical requirements. We provide that overview then to the GGC. They set the agenda, they prioritize and select the topics for the upcoming months. And that agenda is as well being discussed and reviewed by the Standards Board. Once then the agenda is set, we start developing the project content. We assign some staff members here. The GGC assigns some dedicated members to work in a working group. And additionally, then the chair of the IASB appoints 2 members as well from the Standards Board to collaborate and to follow up from the planning phase to the publication. Then we have the drafting phase. This is the stage where the magic happens and where these knowledge group play a very important role. These knowledge group that are made up of these experts in audit as well as domain experts. They will start by looking at all the existing guidance and frameworks that are already out there on the topic. And their main goal is actually to figure out what really needs to be in there to cover an audit in that specific risk area. So making sure that all the basics are there and that there are no important gaps. Then once that draft is finalized, it goes again to the GGC. They will look at it and make some comments and adjustments, of course. And when the draft is then polished and ready, it goes again through a kind of approval process involving the full GGC and the 2 representatives of the standards board before it's getting exposed. Then it's time for getting it out there for public exposure. The draft is always made available for at least 30 days, but the complexity of the topic may extend that period. And for our first draft on cybersecurity, you may have seen that we have currently opened that period for 90 days, because in that way, we want to make sure that everybody gets a pure opportunity to comment. It's important as well to comment on the technical aspects, as well as does the structure of topical requirements make sense to you? Same as we did for the standards, we are using a kind of survey tool, and this approach helps us from our side to keep the process manageable, because as you recall from the standards exposure period, we did have a lot of comments coming in. So we want to make sure that we collect all that feedback accurately and correctly and in an efficient way. But also please note that there is the possibility to provide your comments general or as detailed as you want, as we have that open field textbook there as well. In the meantime, we are also organizing dedicated stakeholder sessions to discuss and collect feedback from different types of stakeholders here. And so all that information is now being gathered and will be provided then to the GGC for discussion and for them to decide on how to address all the comments. And at that stage, we will also assess whether a re-exposure is necessary, and that will be based on predetermined criteria that we are already using for our standards process. And then finally, when the GGC has decided on everything, they will also provide for what we call that disposition table, a table with information on the decision, the rationale for the changes based on the comments. We will approve, they will approve the version, as well as the IASB representatives will then also present the final version to the full IASB for approval, basically on the consistency with the standards there. And then the IPPF Oversight Council will close the cycle by reviewing the due process. And then IIA here has still some technical steps to undertake to make sure that the document gets published and translated. And for our translations, we count a lot on the collaborations from our local institutes. The concept then, what is in there, what it is not. The topical requirements are new requirements, and they come into play when internal auditors are providing assurance on a specific risk area, a topic that has been identified by the IIA. By this, we want to make sure that we're all on the same page when tackling these important and very complex risk areas. These topical requirements are applied based on your internal audit functions risk assessment. This means that they aren't mandatory unless the topic or risk area is included in your audit plan. But if they are included, then these specific topical requirements must be followed. So when an audit covers only certain aspects of that topic, this may then also mean that based on your risk assessment, certain things of the topical requirements may be left out of scope. For instance, the governance part, if you want to focus on certain controls that came out of your risk assessment, that it may be justified to leave out certain requirements of the topical requirements, but then this will need to be justified and will need to be documented. Topical requirements are set as a kind of baseline for engagements. They ensure that certain risk areas are included, that we are scoping them and auditing them appropriately then. And I think that this also gives some confidence to the internal auditor that they are tackling it in the correct way and that they are doing the right things in that specific area. They are helped to shape the scope in the sense that we are looking at the specific aspects there on governance, risk management, control process in that specific risk area. And these are requirements, they are mandatory, they are on the same level as the standards. And therefore, once these requirements are in place and are applicable, they will be included in the external quality assessment as well. Now, what are they not? The topical requirements are not mandatory audit topics, meaning that it's not mandatory to audit all the topics for which topical requirements exist or will be developed. This decision to include a topic is still based on your risk assessment and on your audit planning. So that is very important. This ensures as well that you're still addressing these high-risk areas in your organization, as well as that you're taking into account your specific organizational context. So that emphasis on your risk assessment is very important to understand. The scope of the audit will be based on that assessment, but there may also be parts of the topical requirements that aren't relevant based on that risk assessment, based on the auditor's professional judgment. And in that case, some justification, some documentations will be necessary to make sure that the topical requirements are applied appropriately. But the format and the documenting of this is also up to the Chief Audit Executive to decide. Topical requirements don't provide for a complete work program. It provides for the things that need to be done, that need to be audited in that specific topic, but you will still have to plan and provide for your audit program just like you do in any other engagement. And accordingly, the standards as well, in particular the standards on Domain 5, on the Performing Internal Audit Services standards, where you will find all the requirements and information on performing your audit from the planning phase throughout the development of your findings and your conclusions. And as already mentioned as well, the topical requirements aren't designed to address new emerging topics. They are focusing on more established, mature topics to make sure that we have already clear expectations with practices and solid regulation in that area. Now, why do we need topical requirements? Our first goal is to keep the IPPF framework relevant by tackling these pervasive and evolving risk areas. These risks are often very complex, and we want to make sure that our internal auditors know exactly what to do when assessing these challenging areas. And by doing this, we as the IIA, we want to help and support our auditors to effectively manage these important and often complicated risks. Also, we want to ensure that there is consistency and quality in our audits. Whether you are an audit committee member or a board member or another stakeholder, it's crucial that you can rely on high quality audit reports. And the topical requirements set a minimum kind of standards, what to do, what to evaluate, ensuring for them that we deliver reliable and qualitative audit work. So it's all about building that trust in our profession and in our audit work, showing that we follow high quality standards. Plus, we are a global organization. We need to handle these risks consistently all around the world. And then finally, the IIA also wants to stay relevant as a standard setting body. It's essential for us to keep the profession growing, to push the profession, and by continuously updating our standards and addressing these pervasive risks, we want to ensure that the internal audit profession involves and meets these high standards of excellence there. I have already been addressing the due process, so I will skip the rest of the slide, and I will pass the floor to you, George, to discuss a bit the format, what is in there, and also in particular that topical requirement on cyber that is out there for the moment.
Okay, thank you very much, Kat. So we'll get into a little bit more of a detailed look on some of the topics that Kat covered there. The first thing we wanted to talk about in terms of the format, you'll see this theme repeated throughout the presentation today, is the governance, risk, and controls. And really, we were very intentional in using our 3 lines model, which hopefully you're familiar with, but it seems to be a widely adopted model that's used in the profession. So you'll see that it's very clearly related to that, with internal audit being in that 3rd line. And as Kat mentioned on the previous slide, just making sure that that we're providing independent, objective, and relevant assurance, I would say, as well, to the governing body, if that's the audit committee, the board, whomever that might be for your organization. And then the first and second lines being the controls and the risk management piece. So we'll continue to go through those a little bit more. As far as the elements that are included in the topical requirement, we'll cover some of these in detail in just a second, but I think the first thing that you would notice if you were reviewing the topical requirement draft is that it's a 15-page document. I think that's something that's been pointed out to us, but really if you look at the requirements piece, the mandatory piece of it, it's only on 3 pages of the document. So we're talking pages 2, 3, and 4. So the requirements really cover about 2.5 pages worth of content. So always try to mention that. We have other pieces within there. You can see Appendix A and B. We have an intro page that gives a little bit of background, and we have some of the relevant global internal audit standards and G tags for reference. But a lot of what's in the topical requirements are those last 2 bullet points there. The considerations are on pages 6 through 10. If you think about the requirements being the what, the considerations, which aren't mandatory, that would be the how you would get to those requirements. So it provides examples. It's it's providing some guidance on how an internal auditor would look at those different requirements within that section. And then Appendix B is basically a tool or sort of like a checklist that can be used. It's not intended to be a detailed audit plan. It doesn't have everything that should be considered. But feedback we've gotten from our members has been, hey, can you include something that can help me get started on this, and just as a jumping off point as I start to look at this topical requirement. So now we'll get into cybersecurity specifically, and just to continue on what Kat was saying, building the process of how we select topics and what's being considered. Cybersecurity is one of those that it's just typically a higher risk area. Looking at global organizations, no matter what the industry is, we're told on our pulse surveys and surveys from other providers that we work with, some of the larger accounting firms and consulting firms, that cybersecurity is always top of mind. It's typically, if not the highest risk that's reported by chief audit executives and organizations, it's top 2 or 3. So that's not something that's just happened the past year or so. I mean, that's cybersecurity has been a risk for a number of years, as I'm sure you're aware. So that was one of the biggest drivers in selecting cybersecurity. Also, when you think about, we use the term Internet of Things. So basically saying that everything is connected in some part to cyber risk, to the internet. We just felt like that was a very relevant thing to cover, especially if you start thinking about protecting organizations' information assets. So data, sensitive data, things that they wouldn't want to be made public, that sort of thing. We just felt like cybersecurity would be a good first topic to cover. And again, you'll see the theme there on the key elements: governance, risk management, controls. I mean, you're gonna think I'm just repeating myself over and over, but those are really the key components. And I'll say this as well, just being in full disclosure, cybersecurity is a very broad topic. It covers a lot of different aspects of information technology, and like I just said in the example, the Internet of Things. There are cybersecurity considerations and risk with virtually all parts of an organization's information technology operations. So it's a big topic. We realize that, and we're continuing to fine tune our approach on this. So looking at the cybersecurity topical requirement, just looking at the governance piece, I think these are pretty straightforward in terms of governance. Again, I think the key takeaway here is making sure that your governing body, whatever that may be, a lot of times it's an audit committee or the board, that they're involved in helping provide oversight to the organization on the topic of cybersecurity. So that item C there, board communication, looking at strategy and risks, making sure that our strategic initiatives are being supported by cybersecurity or helping mitigate risk related to those. Pretty straightforward. We're just making sure that organizations are involved and we have an active governing body. Same thing with risk management. I don't think there's anything here that's that you maybe wouldn't expect, but the key thing with risk management is just making sure that it has a seat at the table from an enterprise risk management standpoint. So making sure that we have policies, processes in place, that we have an escalation process. You can see there in example E, we have a way to capture cybersecurity related risk. We escalate those, that we manage them, we monitor them, and make sure that that's part of a continual process as we think about risk. The control processes are a little bit more detailed there. We have 13 of those. I think on this one, it's probably a good time to remind you that we are in the process of getting comments through that public period for review. And so, I anticipate that there will be some changes to the topical requirement, and you may see some of those changes here. So again, back to an earlier comment that I made, cybersecurity is very broad. It touches a lot of things. And so there may be some things on here that we want to fine tune, or maybe add to or take away some of these topics. But we are aware that this is probably an area that is going to take some further editing. You may see things on this one versus governance and risk that might be a little bit more surprising. Like I'll use an example, the SDLC on letter F, that it's commonly referred to as the system development lifecycle or software development lifecycle. Historically, cybersecurity especially, is not part of that, but that's an example where putting it out for draft, we felt like that was something that cybersecurity should be considered as organizations develop applications and think about some of the risk related to that. So again, we'll probably fine tune this list at some point, but it covers a lot of topics. We get that. Okay, so the next 4 slides, the intention is for us to provide some examples today to kind of walk you through the thought process. I know everyone has a different learning style, but I tend to learn better from examples, or give me like a scenario. So hopefully this is beneficial. So the first 2 examples are pretty straightforward. The last 2 are a little bit more ambiguous, I would say. So we'll get into it. So the first example of determining if a topical requirement on cybersecurity is applicable. This is pretty straightforward. Cybersecurity has been identified during your internal audit planning. So if you kind of tie this back to the global internal audit standards, 9.4 is internal audit plan. We talk a lot about risk in that standard, in that particular standard. And typically, when an internal audit plan is created on an annual basis, you will look at the higher risk items, right? Have limited resources, you want to be sure you're tackling the higher risk items. In this instance, if you're going through that process and you have identified cybersecurity from a risk standpoint that you want to execute an audit on that, then it's pretty simple. Yes, this topical requirement on cybersecurity would be required. I think that's pretty straightforward. Example 2 would be the inverse of that. So same process, you're doing your annual internal audit plan. Let's say cybersecurity wasn't one of the higher risk items as you're planning that out. And this very well could be. There's some organizations maybe that there are things that are a little bit more important during that year. Maybe the risk related to something else take precedence. So in this example, you wouldn't have to execute this topical requirement on cybersecurity. And so the next 2 examples are kind of the gray, and where we've gotten questions where it's, would it be required? Wouldn't it be required? So let's get into an example on this where let's say that you're performing an audit and the focus is not cybersecurity. So in this example, we've just created the scenario where let's say you're doing an accounts payable audit, and you're planning that, and maybe you're doing your initial walkthrough, you're meeting with management, and you learn that there are cybersecurity related risks. So in this example, I've tried to illustrate maybe the purchase order request process is something that's web-based or done online. So at that point, the internal auditor would say, gosh, there's some cybersecurity risk related to that. And then the question would be, how does this then relate back to the topical requirement on cybersecurity? So in this example, what we would say is, yes, the cybersecurity topical requirement would be applicable. And what you would need to do is to go through and determine, look at all the different requirements, which are mandatory, and determine what is applicable to this audit. So as an example on this one, maybe we wouldn't spend a lot of time on the governance piece or the risk management piece, but maybe we would look at some of the cyber-related controls around this PO process. So you would just go through and look at that, and we know there's going to be judgment involved, but that would be the process, is to take that cybersecurity topical requirement, kind of lay that next to your audit that you're performing and see if some of those requirements are relevant. Again, I use the word judgment. We realize there's going to be some professional judgment involved in this. And I think Kat's going to talk about quality assessment piece as well. And so we get there's going to be some judgment involved, but I think the key thing that you'll hear us repeat over and over is risk. And so the first two examples, that was creating your internal audit plan, which is going to be risk-based. This is an example of an engagement level risk, right? So that's very relevant to this, but you may not have planned this when you were creating your plan for the year. But as you execute the audit, then you can see that there are going to be cybersecurity considerations that go along with it. So this might be a little different to where it would be required, but how you got to it, but still it would be required. Okay, and the last example that we have, and this kind of relates back to example one, where we had said we were going to plan a cybersecurity audit for the year. One was going to be conducted. Again, we realize cybersecurity is a broad topic. Let's say for this, maybe you're looking at the patching of servers, making sure latest updates have been applied, and that's being done timely. I mean, that's a typical audit that's performed, that I've seen performed. So in this instance, we would say, yes, the topical requirement is required, but there may be justification or rationale on why you didn't look at all aspects of the topical requirement. So in the example I just gave you, if you had just planned to do a patching audit for the year and you're not looking at other pieces, you would just need to say, hey, we looked at this, we looked at the patching aspect of it, which is in the control section of the topical requirement, but it was fairly limited in scope and we didn't look at other things. So there may be a reason for that. Maybe it's risk-based. Maybe we just felt like patching, we identified patching specifically as a high-risk item, or maybe there are limited resources and we can't execute, our internal audit function can't execute every aspect that we want to, but we go back to risk-based. We put it in order in terms of what would be the most important, and this is what we did. So just making sure that you document the rationale on that would be key. And I will pass it back to Kat.
Thank you, George. So the survey. As you all know, we are now in the period of the public exposure for that draft on cybersecurity. You find here on that slide a QR code as well as the link to the website. We strongly encourage you to provide your comments. As you may have seen, if you followed a bit the process on developing the new global internal audit standards, we did receive a lot of comments, and as you have seen probably as well, the final version does contain quite a lot of significant changes compared to the exposed version. So the standards board really took into consideration all these comments. So that's why we strongly encourage you as well to comment on that draft version of the topical requirements. It's not a long survey, as well as there is some room as well in an open text box to provide, if you wish, general comments or more detailed comments. So whatever you wish to comment on or provide there in terms of information is fine. George was already mentioning the quality assessment. Now, we did first foresee some slides on that, but we thought that we were going to run out of time, but I think I can shortly address that with you. For the moment, we are here already developing as well our new global manual on the quality assessments here in our department. And since the topical requirements are mandatory, they are on the same level as the standards, the topical requirements will be assessed as well during the quality assessment. And we are still looking into the methodology on how to do that. But we assume that in the sample phase, a quality assessor will pick some samples to check the conformance with both the standards and the topical requirements. So if there is an audit performed on a subject covered by a topical requirement, the assessor will most likely select an engagement as a sample then. And it's then up to the assessor's professional judgment that plays a critical role then in evaluating as well the applicability as that documentation that may be provided in terms of limited scoping. But more news on that to come. And with that, I think that we have now 15 minutes left for Q&A. And I will call out now to our colleagues to provide us with some questions here. So a first question coming in. It's confusing when topical requirements must be applied. Can you please explain a bit more? Yeah, I think that risk assessment is the key basis, but this is probably also linked to these scenarios, George, that you have provided. So maybe you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure thing, Kat. I think, yeah, you used the right word, risk. I think it could be either the annual audit plan, internal audit planning process, which certainly has a focus on risk, or it could be risk at the engagement level. You know, we kind of walk through some scenarios there, but neither one of those we are trying to promote and say that we need to continue with our risk-based approach, and that should really drive what we're looking at. So.
Audit planning or on the engagement level to do your scoping within the engagement, the risk assessment is still the basic step. Another question, why are the topical requirements mandatory instead of just guidance? Well, great question, and it's not a new one for us. We have seen that one coming in already during speaker engagements as well. I would say that it's important as well to emphasize again these three perspectives here. There's first of all the internal audit perspective. As an internal auditor, you want to make sure that you are addressing the right things and aspects there in these often very complex risk topics. So having topical requirements as mandatory ensures us that we have clear, standardized approaches on these critical areas. We want to make sure that there are no gaps there, that all the gaps are filled. And in this way, it probably also covers all the essentials that give you the confidence that you're providing high quality work and good audit reports. And then talking about the audit reports from the stakeholders' perspective, being an audit committee or a board member, you want to rely on that work of the internal auditors, and making the topical requirements mandatory gives them some type of assurance that we provide consistency in our approach, but that we also provide for a minimum level of quality, that we use ourselves, high quality standards ourselves for our audit work. So it's all about building that trust with our stakeholders, I would say. And then there's that last perspective from the side of the IIA here, from our side as standard setting body. We want to raise and push raise the bar for the profession and push our profession to continuously enhance as well, and to make sure that we evolve. We are living in a quickly evolving business environment, organizational environment, so we want to make sure as well that we stay up to date there with our standards. Another question is justifying the non-applicability, not creating an administrative burden on the internal audit function. Yeah, well, you will have to do your risk-based assessment, and if you think that certain parts are not relevant, that's fine. You will have to justify and document that. But I do think that some people might overestimate that documentation aspect. There can be valid reasons for not addressing certain requirements. For instance, if you want to focus only on a certain control that came out of your risk assessment, then you will probably not want to do the full part of the governance in that topical requirements. But your risk assessment is already documented, and this provides you already for a lot of necessary information that you can use then why you would limit the scope of that topical requirement. Also, many internal audit functions have already been conducting, for instance, cybersecurity audits. So this means that they don't have to start from scratch. It's probably better aligning it now with this new requirements and maybe documenting some things that you probably may have not documented before. But also there, documenting is part of our audit work. We are asking continuously to our auditee to provide us for documentation on their processes and risk management. So we also have to live that standard, that standard of auditing, documenting our audit work. So for me, that's just part of the game and walking the talk. And then just a last clarification is that we have that appendix there, and we did receive some pushback there that it's too heavy in terms of documenting. Now, that checklist is there to support you. It's not a mandatory tool. If you want to use some other type of documentation to justify if you have a limited scope, that's fine. That's up to the decision of the chief audit executive. And as I was already saying, I think that your risk assessment already provides for a very good basis there without having to start from scratch. Another one, does this new concept of topical requirements not hamper a real risk-based approach? You want to take that one, George?
Sure. I think the quick answer on that is no. And I think it's just as we discussed, we feel like risk should be the starting point. Again, whether that's in the internal audit planning phase, looking at the audits you're going to cover for the year, and then also at the engagement level. But that's what we're saying should drive this process. Again, to echo, I think something that Kat mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, this isn't mandating that cybersecurity be an audit topic. It's when the topic comes up, either through planning or the aspects that are included within an audit that contains cybersecurity considerations. So the answer is no. We don't want this to hamper the risk process, the risk evaluation process, and we want risk to really be the driver.
Another one, how will the topical requirements be addressed during the quality assessment process? Well, I think I just elaborated on that. We are still developing that methodology. Of course, there again, the judgment of the assessor will, of course, play an important role, not only in selecting the samples, but also in judging the applicability in a particular audit that he has selected there. Another one, how do smaller internal audit functions with limited resources address topical requirements? That's also a question that we have heard before, a concern that we also received when we issued the new or the exposed version for the standards, that some of the requirements might be too heavy for small internal audit departments. However, here as well, I think that risk-based approach is key, whether you are a small or a bigger audit department, and limited resources should not limit that risk-based approach. If a topic is identified as high risk, you must address it in some way. So also there, you should not perform audit work if you don't have the competencies. So whether it is not having the resources there in terms of capacity or competencies, you will have to address it in some way. And a certain solution can be that you do outsourcing, if possible. And if that is also not possible, which is often the case, of course, for smaller internal audit departments because of limited budgets, then they need to escalate it actually to the audit committee and to the board, which is completely in line with the standards. And I think that even these topical requirements are also a very nice link to that domain 3, where it's now emphasizing a lot on that conversation between the audit function and the board, that you have to discuss your mandate as well as your strategy and as well as inadequate resourcing. So I think it's all part of that conversation that you need to have as internal audit. Another question, as many internal audit functions focus on adding value to their organizations, how do topical requirements support that initiative versus creating another checkbox procedure? George, you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, certainly the intent is not for it to be a checkbox or just kind of go through the motions process. I mean, we talked about how you know, as the third line, if you could look at the 3 lines model, you know, one of the most important things that we do as internal auditors is provide assurance to the governing body. So I think, you know, when you consider it from that perspective, we're trying to, you know, establish a baseline, continue to build that relationship we have with the board or the audit committee or whomever it may be, to make sure that what we're doing continues to be relevant and that we cover, you know, the key items that are related to cybersecurity. So again, to answer the question, no, we don't want it to be just a checkbox item, but we really, you know, want it to be a value add, not just to the board and an audit committee, but, you know, external stakeholders, other folks, you know, who might rely on the work of internal audit. We want to be, you know, very considerate of that as well.
I see that we still have 4 minutes left, so maybe just a last one then. Since cybersecurity is a quickly evolving subject, how will the IIA ensure that the requirements stay updated? Yeah, that's also a very relevant one, and it's still part of the thing that we need to fine-tune, or the aspect that we need to fine-tune in our due diligence process. We are having that discussion now with the Global Guidance Council. There will definitely be more regular updates than the standards, and that frequency, for defining that frequency, we will probably use different types of criteria, such as, for instance, minimum 3 years, but also criteria such as new important legislation, regulation, or other changes in the environment impacting that risk domain might be useful criteria there. So more news on that to come, but definitely we are aware of the fact that we will have to update these topical requirements more regularly. So I will leave it to that for the questions then. I want to thank you all for your participation here in the call. Thank you to you as well, George, for providing us with the more technical information on the cybersecurity topical requirement. This call is being recorded. It will be made available as well on our website. So we do hope now that with all this background information, you will take some time now to read the topical requirements and fill in our survey in case you haven't done so, because your input is really very valuable for us to support us and to enhance the current draft and to bring us to that final stage of publication. So thank you all, and I look forward to see you and meet you maybe in person at our international conference in Washington, D.C. Thank you all.